Welcome back to Cryptid's Den. How have you been lately? Really? How's your heart, your head, your week? I know life can get a little wild, so I'm glad you're here taking a moment for yourself. Let me know where you're tuning in from and how things are going. I'd love to hear. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. You're always welcome here. Now let's get into it. What would you do if a baby Bigfoot, weak, bleeding, covered in surgical scars and a medical barcode, collapsed outside your cabin door in the dead of winter? Elias Monroe, a former senior biologist in a top-secret government program, once signed off on those very experiments. He thought he had escaped it all. The lab, the lies, the blood, after blowing the whistle and losing everything. His wife and daughter were erased as a warning. Since then, Elias has lived in isolation, deep in Wyoming's Black Ravine, haunted by guilt. But that night, staring into the eyes of a Bigfoot mother, eyes that mirrored his wife's final plea, Elias made a choice. He saved the child and named him Milo. What followed was a series of sacred gifts, coded warnings, and a final mission that would either redeem him or bury him alongside the truth. This is Elias' story. The last day I was still a man the system could name was also the day I lost both of them. I remember it too clearly. Not like a memory, but like a film I never agreed to watch, looped forever behind my eyes. Snow had fallen the night before, the kind that didn't stick but made everything look like it was holding its breath. My wife, Camille, had gone outside to get the mail. I watched her from the kitchen window, mug in hand, steam rising like a ghost between us. And then the truck came. Fast. Too fast for our little dirt road. Too fast for someone who wasn't aiming. She didn't scream. Just crumpled like a dropped coat. I dropped the mug. It shattered. I didn't run. I walked. Every step felt underwater. And my daughter? Lila. Her boots were still by the back door. Her sketchbook still open on the couch, showing a half-finished drawing of a bear wearing sunglasses. She vanished without a footprint in that snow. No note, no scream. Just absence. So total it felt like the air had been rearranged. That was 8 years ago. Since then, I haven't had a name that matters. I hadn't used a phone. No credit cards, no official address, no online presence, no bank accounts, just cash and cans. I live in a rotted-out cabin pressed between two cliff walls in Black Ravine, Wyoming, where the trees grow heavy and crooked, and the air forgets to echo. I wasn't always like this. I used to wear a badge, a level 3 biology clearance tag. I was Dr. Elias Monroe, senior cryptobiologist for a program that didn't exist. We worked underground, literally beneath a retired Cold War listening station. Our task? Classify undocumented life forms. Preserve, catalog, neutralize if needed. That's the version we were told. What we were actually doing was experimenting, not on cells, on beings. There were creatures, living, bleeding, terrified. That didn't fit in any book. One of them looked straight into the camera during a vivisection and signed something with its hands. My assistant said it looked like a word, a name. I submitted a report. I filed it through encrypted back channels. I marked it urgent, signed it in blood. 2 days later, the lab was evacuated due to seismic instability. The creatures vanished. My login was revoked. When I went home, my wife said someone had been sitting in our driveway all afternoon, watching. The next morning, she died. The next morning, my daughter disappeared. And me, I stopped existing. But I never stopped watching. I built a wall of paper in the cabin, stacks of burned maps, scratched out code, hand-drawn sketches of footprints, too wide to belong to any man. I listened to the woods like it was an old enemy learning to forgive me. Sometimes I would think I heard her, Lila, laughing behind the trees. Sometimes I'd call her name and feel the forest hold its breath. Tonight, it was cold again. That same breathless cold. I sat by the wood stove, turning over the metal frame that still held the last photo we ever took together. Layla's hair was in braids. Camille's hands were on my shoulder. We were smiling at nothing, the kind of smile that doesn't know it's the last one. The flames popped. The window whistled. And then it happened. 3 knocks. Not at the door, on the roof. Soft, deliberate. Not wind, not a branch. 3 perfectly spaced knocks, like someone was saying, "I know you're here, and I remember." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because the last time I heard those knocks, 3 soft, slow, it was in the lab. When the cage door closed behind a young female we'd tagged Subject 7NMB, she had watched us with something more than fear, something closer to recognition. She had tapped once, then twice, then 3 times on the steel. My colleagues called it mimicry. I called it grief. Tonight, I stood, slowly, bones aching from too many winters in hiding. I didn't reach for my gun, just the flashlight, just the silence. I opened the door and looked out into the dark. The snow had stopped, but the cold felt older. And I swear, just for a moment, there was something standing at the tree line, watching me, too tall, too still, with shoulders that didn't move when it breathed. If it breathed, but then it was gone, just the wind again. I backed into the cabin, locked the door, sat down, and stared at the ceiling like it could bleed, because something had found me again, and it didn't come screaming. It came knocking. It didn't snow that night, but the air carried something heavier. I remember the way the wind moved, not like it was passing through, but like it was watching, like it knew. I didn't sleep. Not after the 3 knocks. I sat by the window with the flashlight in one hand and an old .22 in the other. Not to shoot, just to feel something familiar in my grip. The hours crawled. The woods outside pressed in. I counted every creak in the roof, every sigh in the logs. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. The knocks, the shadow, the years catching up. And then I heard them. Footsteps. Heavy. Fearful. I killed the lantern. The fire in the stove was nothing but red coals now. The cabin dipped into shadows. Something moved beyond the porch. I froze. And then they stepped out of the tree line. 2 figures, one larger than the doorway, the other hunched and shaking, an arm bent at an unnatural angle. And between them, a third, small, limp. I didn't breathe, not out of fear, out of something deeper, a recognition. They didn't come closer. They didn't make a sound, just stood there, as if asking. The larger one shifted slightly, and the moonlight touched its face, or what was left of it. I saw the coarse fur, streaked with ash and scars. I saw a thick, rusted metal ring still locked around its neck. A broken chain dangled from it like a memory too stubborn to fall off. The smaller one, her arm twisted, trembling, held onto the bundle at her chest like it was life itself. And then she took a step forward. She didn't roar. She didn't threaten. She knelt. Her breathing was fast, shallow, panicked. She laid the child on the snow in front of my cabin door. Not a word, not a sound. Just the quiet press of desperation. The child, barely moving, was covered in thick fur, matted and torn, ribs showing, eyes closed. Every rise of its chest a battle. Then she looked up. Our eyes met, and in that instant I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. A mother begging, not for herself, for what little she still had. I opened the door. Slowly. My hands were up. No weapons, no threat. She didn't move. I stepped onto the porch. The snow crunched beneath me, sharp like glass. I reached down, eyes never leaving hers, and lifted the child. It was warm, too warm. Fever. Infection. When I stood back up, they were already gone. Not like shadows, like wind. One moment there. The next, just trees and cold. I brought the child inside, laid it on the old table. My hands were trembling, but they remembered the way that they used to in the lab. Before the guilt. Before everything fell apart. The child had deep lacerations across its side. A bone near the hip looked displaced. The breathing was shallow. But the eyes, when they opened, were awake. They were brown. Brown with gold near the iris. I knew those eyes. I had seen them once, years ago, looking up at me from the passenger seat as we drove to her first swim meet. My daughter's eyes, the exact shade, the same quiet intensity. I whispered something. I don't remember what, and the child blinked. Slow. Not like a reflex, like it understood. I cleaned the wounds, applied pressure, washed the blood, the dirt. I worked in silence. No thoughts, just motion. My hands moved like they still knew how to save. I wrapped the child in old wool blankets and lit the stove again. The cabin filled with heat and pine smoke and something else I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. It didn't speak, but it watched me. Not like an animal, not even like a child. Like something older. Something that had learned pain without being taught it. I stayed up through the night, just watching, listening to its breath, wondering if I'd just welcomed death into my home. Near dawn, I gave it a name. Milo, I said. My voice cracked when I said it. It was the name of Lila's old teddy bear. The one she never left behind. Not even for doctor visits. The one I found under her pillow the morning she disappeared. I said the name again. Milo. The child didn't flinch, but I swear it blinked. I turned away then. Back to the stove. My shoulders shook. Not from the cold. For the first time in 5 years, I cried. Not because I was afraid, not even because I was grieving, but because something inside me broke loose. A rusted piece of guilt that had been locked up since the lab. Since the reports, since I signed off on procedures I didn't fully understand and let them go forward anyway. I didn't cry for this creature. I cried because I knew, deep down, that I had helped build the cage it once lived in. And now, here it was, lying half dead on my table. And I was the only thing between it and the same silence that took my family. Outside, the wind picked up. The trees groaned. I checked the door. No footprints remained. Just silence, and somewhere in the distance, something howled. But it didn't sound like a predator. It sounded like mourning, or maybe warning. Either way, the woods were listening again. And so was I. I don't know what I expected when I named him. Maybe that it would make him more real. Maybe that giving something a name could protect it, like it did in the old myths. Or maybe I just needed to say something out loud that didn't echo loneliness. But the name stuck. Milo. And when I said it again the next morning, whispered. Cautious, like it might break if I said it too loud. He turned his head toward me, slow and deliberate, eyes half-lidded but watching. Watching like he understood. I spent that day doing what my hands remembered. Cleaning wounds, managing infection, stitching what could be stitched. The damage was deep, but not unfixable. Underneath all that fur, there was anatomy. And God help me, I knew it. The shoulder socket was dislocated, but still viable. I used a belt to anchor it while I checked the swelling near the ribs. A fractured second costal bone, bruising along the intercostals. He should have been in agony, but he never cried. Not once. He flinched. Sure. His breathing got shallow when I touched too close to a nerve cluster. But he didn't cry out. He didn't even growl. He just watched me. Not like a wild animal waiting to attack. Not like a scared child either. He watched me like someone who'd already seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. The fire crackled beside us, pine sap hissing inside the logs. I kept the room dim, warm, no sudden movements. I worked by lamplight, just enough to see without turning him into a silhouette of shadows. Around midday, I tried feeding him. Water first with a dropper. He drank, not greedily, just steady, then a bit of soft bread soaked in broth. He chewed slowly, eyes never leaving me. The way he watched, there was patience there, focus, intent. He wasn't mimicking. He was reading me, and at some point I realized I was doing the same. I couldn't stop comparing him, not to data, not to field reports, to her, to Lila. There was something in the way his left brow lifted when the fire popped. The way his fingers curled into the blanket when the wind scratched the cabin door. The way his eyes held just a second too long after I spoke. It wasn't resemblance. It was memory, mine. Buried deep and rotting, clawing its way back to the surface. I thought I was losing it. I stood at the sink, washing my hands red raw just to have something else to look at. Something other than those eyes. I gripped the counter until my knuckles ached. But when I turned back around, he was sitting up, on his own, and he was staring at the picture frame. It sat on the mantel above the stove. The last photo. My wife, my daughter, and me, frozen in time. Smiling into a summer we didn't know would be our last. His head tilted. He didn't reach for it, just stared. Then he turned his face toward me. Slow, like asking a question without words. And I swear to you, my knees nearly gave out, because he didn't just look curious. He looked like he missed them. I didn't speak. Couldn't. The words got caught behind whatever lived in my throat now. I just walked over, lifted the frame, and handed it to him. Carefully, he didn't take it, but his eyes studied it, line by line, person by person. Lingered the longest on Lila. Her braids, her soft eyes, her hand on my shoulder. He looked at her the way I did. Like something I'd never forgive myself for losing. I didn't sleep again that night. Not because I was afraid. I was past fear. Past logic, too. I just sat in the armchair across from him, watching. Listening to the wind howl outside the cabin. Watching shadows crawl across the wooden floor like old ghosts, trying to remember their way home. Around 3 a.m., the fire dimmed again. The fire dimmed again. I got up to stoke it, and that's when I saw it. The scar behind his right shoulder blade. A long, clean line. Too precise for claws, too narrow for traps. I leaned in closer. Carefully, I brushed back the fur. And there it was, a small bulge, a smooth ridge beneath the skin. No. It couldn't be, but it was. I ran my fingers along the edge, gentle, trying not to wake him. It was warm, warmer than the rest of his body. Not natural, not tissue. I pressed slightly. It lit, not to the eye, but I felt it. A pulse. A vibration against my skin. A transmitter. An active one. Embedded. Military grade. God help me. I staggered back. Suddenly the fire felt too hot. The walls too close. My own heartbeat roared in my ears like thunder trapped in a metal drum. I'd seen this before. Years ago. Back when we were running ops in northern Nevada. Tracking migratory patterns of Type 3 bipeds. I had signed the requisition order for those implants. I had read the specs. Lifelong battery. Deep tissue placement. Biometric relay. Always on. Which meant someone, somewhere, already knew he was here. I looked back at Milo. He was awake. He didn't speak. Just met my eyes. And for the first time, he looked afraid. Not of me, of what might be coming next. And somewhere in that moment, between the weight of my shame and the echo of boots I hadn't heard yet, I understood. This wasn't just a child dropped off in the woods. He was evidence, and I was the last man alive who could still read the files they buried. I knelt beside him, whispered, I'm sorry." He blinked once. I said it again. This time slower, meaning it. And then I did something I hadn't done in almost a decade. I prayed. Not for me. For time. Because I knew it had already started running out. The frost hadn't melted yet when I opened the door that morning. Pale light stretched through the trees like it didn't want to touch anything. The air hung thick, colder than usual. But it wasn't the kind of cold you feel in your bones. It was the kind you feel in your teeth, the back of your throat, right before a storm. Something was wrong. Before I even saw what they left, I knew. It was laid out like an altar, or a warning, or maybe both. On the porch steps, just inches from where my boots had stood the night before, someone or something had placed 3 things, each one deliberate, each one pointed like a whisper you're not supposed to hear. The first was a section of chain, burned black, still warm at one end, the kind they used in containment labs. I recognized the make. I had ordered those coils myself once, back when I thought steel and fire could hold anything sacred. The second was a tooth, a canine, thick-rooted and jagged. Too big for any known species around here, except one. There were still bits of dried blood at the base, curled into the grooves. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. The third stopped me cold, a child's necklace, faded pink cord, worn plastic beads, and a little silver heart charm bent at the corner. I knew that necklace. I'd logged it. It was listed in a recovery box from an old raid in Arizona. We weren't supposed to keep the belongings, but I had kept the record. Somewhere, a photo still existed in a sealed folder. Subject R14. Artifact retained for cross-genetic testing. A little girl had worn that necklace once. A little girl who never came back. Now, it was on my porch, covered in blood. Not a lot, just enough to say, we were there. We know. And you remember, don't you? I stood there for a long time. Long enough that the morning wind turned sharp. Long enough for my breath to freeze on my jacket collar. I didn't touch anything at first, just looked. Took it all in. Then I went inside and grabbed a towel. Used it to pick the items up one by one. I didn't know if they were tracking my prints. I didn't know who was watching. But I knew better than to assume I was alone now. Milo didn't say a word. He just watched me from the floor near the fireplace, wrapped in the thickest blanket I had. His fever had gone down, but his breathing still carried weight, like every inhale asked permission. I knelt beside him, laid the necklace gently on the table, beside the tooth and the chain. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. He stared at them like they meant something to him too. That afternoon, I tried to do what I always did when panic started whispering. I wrote, not on a computer. I didn't trust the grid anymore. I had an old ledger, leather-bound, with half the pages missing from mildew. I scrawled every detail I could remember. The way the chain smelled, the exact placement of each object, the burn pattern on the metal link. I diagrammed it, took photos with a film camera, not digital. I wanted to send it somewhere, mail it, email it, drop it at some half-trustworthy conspiracy blog if I had, but when I tried to connect the satellite uplink, the signal jammed. At first, I thought the equipment was just old, but it wasn't. The receiver blinked green, then red, then flatlined. Someone was cutting me off. I checked the perimeter. No boot prints, no tire tracks, just wind-pressed snow and deer trails. But I could feel it again, that heaviness, that silence that wasn't silence. The kind you get when you're being listened to but not heard. That night I didn't sleep. I kept the lights dim. Set up motion sensors, old military ones, the kind that ran on analog pulse, not Wi-Fi. I placed one near the tree line, another under the porch, the third inside the chimney, just in case. Milo sat up more. He'd started mimicking hand movements, not full gestures, but intent. When I tapped my fingers on the armrest, he'd mirror the rhythm. When I held up my hand, palm out, he'd lift his a moment later. Hesitant. Careful. He wasn't learning. He was remembering. It hit me all at once. He'd seen this before. Somewhere. Maybe from the father I hadn't seen again since that night. Or maybe from someone else. But it was communication, not instinct. Patterned memory. He was trying to speak. And that terrified me more than silence. Because if he could speak, even just like this, then whatever had caged him wanted to silence more than his voice. They wanted to erase the possibility of language altogether. I sat beside him, grabbed a pencil and an old map of the region, turned it over. I drew a simple sign, a circle, a line through it. He stared, then reached out and scratched something beside it. 3 lines. Then he looked at me, and I understood. It wasn't a word. It was a warning. Later that night, I heard the chime from the motion sensor near the tree line. Just one. A single pulse. I stepped outside, gun in hand, flashlight off. And there, just at the edge of the woods, was something I hadn't seen in years. A symbol, carved into the bark of an old pine. Fresh, deep. It was the same as the one Milo had scratched on the map. Someone had been here, not hours ago, minutes, and I wasn't sure they'd left. They showed up just after noon. Not early enough to feel like neighbors, not late enough to be passing through. I heard the crunch of tires before I saw them. Deep, slow, confident pressure on fresh frost, like they wanted me to hear, like the sound itself was a knock. I stepped out onto the porch before they had time to reach it. Jacket half zipped. Rifle not in hand, but leaning visible beside the door. It was cold, windless, the sky the color of split granite. Everything felt still. Held. 2 men, matching dark green jackets. Shoulder patches that said Forest Service, but too crisp for this zone. Too clean for boots that didn't show wear. One had ears, the other didn't. But both had the kind of posture that gives away training. Not hikers. Not locals. Government muscle and ranger's clothing. They smiled. But the smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Afternoon, sir," the tall one said. His voice was calm, polite, controlled. I nodded once, kept my hand on the porch railing. "Everything okay up here?" he asked. "We're tracking a missing research animal. Got reports something might have crossed into your section." I didn't answer right away. Let the silence settle. Let him feel it. Then, "What kind of animal?" The short one spoke this time. Younger, less sure of himself. Rhesus macaque. Female. Pregnant. Escaped from a convoy late last week. Probably scared. Possibly aggressive. I stared at him long enough that he looked away. "Rhesus macaque," I said finally, drawing it out. He nodded. Bred. Experimental implant. Pretty valuable. Valuable enough to send in the federal types disguised as rangers? That broke the taller man's grin for a second. Just a flicker. Then it was back. "We're just trying to keep the public safe, sir. You haven't seen anything. Unusual tracks. Maybe signs of digging?" I shook my head. "Just the usual. Elk, coyote, that's it." He tilted his head slightly. "You sure?" I didn't blink. "You think I don't know what lives in my own woods?" His eyes flicked past me toward the cabin. Toward the chimney. The window. Toward where Milo was. I took a single step forward. Not aggressive. Just enough to shift the conversation's gravity. "Mind if we take a quick look around?" the younger one said, trying to sound casual. I smiled. And this time, mine didn't reach my eyes. "Absolutely, I mind." A long pause followed. They weren't used to that word. The tall one scratched his chin, the kind of gesture meant to stall, to send a signal. He leaned in slightly, like he wanted to soften it. "Sir, I don't think you understand the sensitivity of... I cut him off. I understand exactly how sensitive it is. That's why you're not going inside. More silence. Then the younger one took a half step toward the porch, and Milo made a sound. Just one, a short, low breath. From behind the stove. Almost inaudible, but I heard it. And so did the man with no sunglasses. His hand twitched. Barely, but enough. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, smooth, matte black. It looked like a phone. But it wasn't. I'd seen that model before. Biometric scanner, short range, government issue. He saw me watching. And that was when he knew. And I knew we weren't pretending anymore. The taller one stepped in quick, too quick for a ranger, but I blocked the doorway with my shoulder. I'm going to have to ask you to leave now, I said, low. You're obstructing federal investigation, he replied. Voice tighter now. You're on private land with no warrant and a fake badge, I answered. You've got 30 seconds before I radio state police and tell them 2 men with military scanners just showed up looking for a monkey they can't describe. They hesitated. Long enough to know they were unsure how far they could push it. Then the taller one smiled again. The same empty smile as before. No problem, he said. We'll come back. You stay safe, sir. They turned, walked to the truck like nothing had happened, but I watched the driver's side mirror. The younger one looked back. Not once. Twice. And the way his eyes moved, slow, scanning. Not like he was curious. Like he was memorizing. I didn't move until their truck was swallowed by the trees. Then I went back inside and locked the door. Milo was crouched behind the woodpile. Shoulders tight, eyes wide. He hadn't made a sound since that breath. I knelt beside him, took his hand. Cold, shaking. It's okay, I said, even though it wasn't. They're gone, but I knew they weren't. Not really. They'd be back. Not with questions, with orders. The sound came just past midnight. Soft, like a boot step cushioned in moss. But not human. The weight was wrong. Too heavy, too slow. I was already awake, had been for hours, lying there, staring at the rafters while the old heater whispered its aches through the pipes. Milo slept curled near the fireplace. His breath steady but shallow. He'd started twitching in his sleep, small movements, like memories he didn't want to relive. I didn't blame him. When I heard the second step, closer this time, I reached for the flashlight and killed the rest of the lights. The dark swallowed everything, and for a moment I couldn't tell if I was shaking or if the floor beneath me was. Then came the sound on the roof, a low scrape. Not the way branches move in the wind. This was the weight of something that had climbed up there, steady, controlled. Something testing the structure. I moved to the far window, lifted the edge of the curtain. Saw nothing. But I felt it, the kind of pressure that comes right before something breaks. I turned back toward Milo, but he was already sitting up, eyes wide open, looking at me. Not frightened, just alert. I crossed the room slow, crouched beside him, whispered, "Stay here." He didn't nod, just lowered his head and curled tighter. I took the back exit, through the small mudroom, into the trees. The snow had started again, fine, sharp flakes that looked like dust under the moonlight. I moved to the tree line and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Something moved between the trees. No sound, no breath, just motion. A figure, too tall for a man, broader than any elk, covered in hair that moved like it had its own wind. The moon hit the side of its face for a second, and I saw the line of old scars, the glint of something around its neck. Metal, twisted, rusted from years of use. He stepped forward, not to charge, to show. In his right hand was a piece of something. Leather, torn, damp. The edge of a patch still attached to it. a military rank stripe. I didn't speak. He raised his left arm, opened the palm. There, pressed into the center of his chest, was a mark made not with claws or teeth, but rope, chain. Something had been tied to him, and whatever it was had been yanked off with such force it left behind a ring of scarring. In the center of that scar was a new shape, braided wire, a circle, twisted around with purpose. Not a threat, a symbol. I felt the weight of it settle over me. He didn't need to say what had happened. One of them was gone. One of those men hadn't made it back. I didn't ask where the body was. I didn't need to. He hadn't killed him, but he'd marked him, and that was worse. The creature turned his head slightly toward the cabin, then back to me, his eyes, amber, sharp, narrowed. Then he disappeared, not ran, just folded into the trees. Gone. I stood there for minutes, the cold soaking into my bones. But my blood ran hot. Something was building. The line between what we'd done to them and what they might do back was beginning to blur. And I wasn't sure which side I stood on anymore. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't risk them tracking the signal from Milo's implant. Not any longer. I set up the table like a field lab. Poured whiskey over every surface. Laid out the scalpel, the forceps, the iodine. My hands shook as I sterilized the blade, not because I was afraid to cut, but because I knew what this meant. If I took the chip out, I made a choice. A permanent one. No going back. No deniability. No gray area left to hide in. Milo sat on the chair beside the stove, knees tucked close to his chest. He didn't flinch when I explained what I was about to do. He lifted his arm, offered it to me, like he understood, like he trusted me. God help me. I gave him a rag to bite down on, whispered a thank you, and made the incision just below the scar. The blade sliced through, not deep, but enough to reach the subcutaneous layer. There it was. Small, matte gray, oval, flashing once every 6 seconds. I pulled it out with the tweezers, placed it into a lead-lined pouch I'd prepared years ago. I stitched the wound closed as best I could, cleaned it, wrapped it. When it was done, he exhaled once, deeply, and let the rag fall to the floor. I took the chip and hiked east, far, 3 miles through snow and thorn and rock. I buried it in the hollow trunk of an old spruce that had been struck by lightning last summer. Dropped a handful of rusty nails and copper wire inside to scramble any low-frequency signals. Then I left. By the time I got back to the cabin, night had started to fall again. Inside, Milo was sitting up straighter. He wasn't just watching me anymore. He was mimicking hand shapes, not random, structured. He moved his hands slowly but with intention, and I recognized the form. It wasn't a cell, not exactly. It was modified, like what we'd seen once in the Nevada tunnels. Subject 7MEMB used it. The one who'd tapped on the steel before being sedated. The one we'd tagged for cognition beyond baseline. I repeated the motion back to him. He smiled. Not wide. Just a small, tight curve of the lip. A thank you. I sat down beside him. Didn't speak. Didn't eat. Because in that moment I wasn't looking at an experiment or a creature. I was looking at someone who had survived more than I had, and still chose to speak. We left before sunrise. I packed light, just a knife, a flashlight. The flannel shirt Camille once said made me look honest, and Milo's blanket, still warm from the fire. The snow had turned to ice overnight. It cracked beneath our boots in tiny protests, like the ground knew we didn't belong there anymore. I didn't look back at the cabin. I knew if I did, I might not be able to keep walking. Milo walked beside me, not behind. Not behind. Not dragged. Beside, like he understood this was the last stretch. That we were heading towards something that neither of us could undo once crossed. We moved slow through the woods, past the burnt spruce tree, past the old game trail where the moss still hadn't grown back from the traps I'd pulled last year. The silence wasn't silence. It had shape now. Breath, like something was watching us from every direction but choosing, just for now, to let us pass. When we reached the ridge above Elk Hollow, I saw them. 2 shadows at the base of the clearing. Still, waiting. The light was pale blue, cold light, pre-dawn. The hour where everything feels like it might not exist if you blink too long. Milo stopped. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just stood there, looking down at them like he was remembering the shape of something he thought he'd lost. I put a hand on his back. His shoulders were small beneath the fur, but steady. He turned to me and raised his hands, not shaking, not afraid. He made the sign we'd practiced. One hand over his chest, then the other reaching out. Father, my throat locked. I couldn't breathe for a second, couldn't move. I blinked, once, hard, and nodded. I wanted to say something, but there was nothing left that words could hold. He stepped forward, down the ridge. His feet sank into the snow. The 2 figures at the clearing's edge straightened. The male, taller, broader, chest scarred with the symbol I had seen burned into bark weeks ago, stepped first. Then the mother. She still wore the limp in her right leg, still held her arms slightly crooked, but her eyes were fire. When she saw him, she let out a breath. No cry, no scream. Just breath. Like she'd been holding it for years. Milo crossed the last few feet between them. The male placed a hand on his head. The mother bent to one knee, pressed her forehead to his, and then, together, they turned to me. I stood still, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know if I deserved to step forward. I'd helped break them once, helped build the place that tore them apart. I had given that system my loyalty, my research, my silence. But Milo didn't let it end there. He turned back, climbed 2 steps back up the ridge, reached for me. Not with words, with open hands. I met him, and when I got close enough to see his face fully in the light, he signed one last thing. You saved me. I shook my head. No, I just, gave you back what was already yours. Then something moved behind the male. A shape I hadn't noticed at first. He stepped aside and knelt down, pulled out something wrapped in animal hide. He walked toward me, slowly. His steps didn't make sound. He reached out and placed the object into my hand. Heavy, cold. When I unwrapped it, I saw the metal casing. Black. Burned. Military issue. A hard drive. One I hadn't seen since my last year in the lab. I turned it over. Stamped on the underside. Barely visible beneath the soot. Redberg 7. Internal access only. Level black. This wasn't a gesture of peace. This was the truth. All of it. The experiments, the holding cells, the failed pregnancies, the generations erased, the deaths we called containment loss. They had it all. They had taken it back. And now they were giving it to me, not to expose, to carry, to remember. Milo lingered. One more look, one small, trembling breath. Then he stepped into the woods with them, and the forest closed behind them like it had never been opened. I stood there long after the sun rose, long after the wind picked up and started to bite again, long after the cold finally touched my bones. Then I whispered the only thing I had left in me. I couldn't save my family. I closed my hand around the drive, but I kept yours alive. And maybe that was enough. I buried the drive in the only place they'd never think to look. Right beside the others, I dug with my hands. No shovel, no tools, just bone against frozen dirt, clawing through snow and roots until the soil gave way like it always had. Soft and dark, the way it had the night I put Camille in the ground. No marker. No stone. Just memory and regret. I wrapped the drive in her old scarf. The one she used to wear in the fall when the leaves turned copper and the wind carried that smell of smoke and apples. I tied it tight, not because I thought it would protect the contents. No, the casing was sealed, military grade, nothing short of fire or pressure would crack it. But because I needed it to feel like it meant something, like it belonged to something bigger than secrets, bigger than me. I pressed it down deep into the hollow space just to the left of the roots, covered it back up, packed the earth down. Not too neat, just enough to disappear. The cabin went up the next day, not by accident. I lit the match myself. Started in the back room, where I kept the maps, the photos, the evidence. I soaked the floorboards with kerosene, let it seep through the cracks. It caught fast, like it had been waiting. The fire didn't roar, it whispered, crawled, licked the walls like it knew this place, like it had grown up here too. I stood outside and watched the roof collapse. The windows didn't shatter, they gave in, quietly, like the house had finally let go. I didn't cry. There was nothing left in me that needed permission. The smoke curled up into the trees and disappeared. By morning, there was nothing but ash, steam, and the outline of what once held a life. I was ready to leave. I packed what little I had into a canvas bag. Some jerky, the old pistol, a few photographs I'd sealed in wax, and started walking. No roads, no destination. Just the direction the wind told me. I didn't look back, but something stopped me. One last step. I turned. There, in the center of the charred cabin floor, was something the fire hadn't touched. Not completely. A small stone, braided with hair. Human hair. Blonde, tied carefully around the middle. Next to it, a shard of something pale. At first I thought it was a piece of kindling, or a bone fragment from an old meal. But I knew better. It was a finger bone, small, polished smooth. It didn't belong to anything that walked on four legs. And beside that, pressed into the dirt, was the faintest imprint, a handprint, 3 fingers wide, deliberate. They had been here after. They had seen it. And they had left me something. A piece of themselves. Or maybe a piece of someone they remembered. I knelt in the dirt and ran my hand over the stone. It was warm, not from the fire, from something older, like it had been held, passed down, like it carried memory. I sat there, knees in the ash, heart beating in some rhythm I didn't recognize anymore. And I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the first field report I ever wrote, the one I never filed, the one that got buried under newer, cleaner lies. I unfolded it. It was damp, edges curled. The ink had faded, but the words were still there. I read it out loud, not to anyone. To everything, to whom it may concern, the subjects designated Class 7 bipeds do not exhibit traditional animal behavior. They form units. They demonstrate memory. They mourn their dead. They pass down knowledge. They protect their young. They have language, though it may not resemble ours. Most of all, they remember. And more terrifying than their strength or their size is this: they forgive. If we let them. I folded the page again, held it to my chest, and for the first time since this began, I didn't feel alone. The wind shifted. Somewhere deep in the trees, a low sound echoed. Not a howl, not a growl, something else, a presence, watching, waiting. Then the radio on my belt crackled. It hadn't worked in months. Dead battery, I'd checked. But now it was alive again, a faint hum. Then a voice, female, clipped, familiar, Papa read. I read you, the voice I hadn't heard in 8 years. Not since she disappeared. My hand went to the receiver, but I didn't answer. Not yet. I stood, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked into the trees, not running, not hiding, just listening. The woods had never been silent. We'd just forgotten how to hear them. There are stories that live in books, and then there are stories that breathe in the quiet spaces between people. Etched not in ink, but in scars, in silence, in the look someone gives when they've lost more than they can say, and somehow, still, choose to keep going. This was one of those stories, not about monsters, not really, but about what we choose to see when we're staring into something we don't understand. About what fear does to the truth, and what love does to fear. It's about how easily we turn the unfamiliar into a threat. How quickly we justify cages when we forget the eyes looking back at us belong to someone too. But maybe, just maybe, it's also about the other path. The harder one, the one that doesn't end in vengeance or victory, but in quiet choices that no one sees, in hands that reach across pain, in memories that don't die with the ones we lose, but stay behind in the most unexpected places, carried in gestures, in shared warmth, in the weight of forgiveness. Because if there's anything to take from all this, it's that compassion isn't weakness. It's resistance. It's survival. And sometimes, it's the only thing that keeps the fire from spreading further. We are not defined by what we destroy. We are remembered by what we protect. And sometimes, the most human thing we can do is see humanity where no one else dares to look. Thank you for walking through the dark with us tonight. If this story moved you in any way, if it made you think, feel, remember something long buried, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you believe, like I do, that these stories matter, not just for what they reveal, but for what they remind us we still carry inside, consider subscribing, leaving a like, or sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and listen closely. Some truths don't knock. They whisper, and they're waiting for someone to answer.